moderators of today's panel, Dr. Shalini Sharma and Saili Palande-Datar, have also served as advisory members for Punyache Paani, the Living Waters Museum's exhibition that celebrates Pune's waters. To introduce the moderators, firstly, we have Dr. Shalini Sharma, who's an associate professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IISER Pune and a member of the Center for Water Research. She's also an environmental sociologist and founding member of Remember Bhopal Trust and Museum. Secondly, we have Saili Palande-Datar, who's an Indologist, historian, and ecologist by training. She has been researching Pune's history, art, and culture for the many last years and have been involved in several environmental movements for documenting and saving the city's natural and cultural heritage. Now, I hand over the mic to Dr. Shalini to take the event forward.
Thank you, everyone. And so I know we have been running short of time in the previous panel. So in this session, we would try to be within time and to make the discussion as provocative and with fireworks as it is possible while discussing politics. So while we're at the topic, I want to give a short introduction to how we came about this festival on water. In 2020, Vijaya and I joined Humanities and Social Sciences Department in IISER Pune, and Vijaya comes with both years of experience in water issues as development economist and with wide networks. And he was he led the effort to set up the Center for Water Research. Following that effort, Professor Sarah Ahmed became associated with Center for Water Research as adjunct faculty member and brought this amazing initiative, which is called as Living Waters Museum. Both Living Waters Museum and Center for Water Research are interdisciplinary consortiums, which looks into knowledge production, as well as the politics of knowledge on nature and culture intersections. So this is where we are trying to create this awareness, as well as produce more knowledge and more excitement about what happens when nature and culture intersect over water resource. We have had water talks, 3 seasons of water talks in last 2 years. There are a lot of interesting and interesting speakers about the water, both as a natural resource but also as a socio-cultural resource, have come together and shared their experience and insights into various domains of water. This festival, Punyache Paani, I do have to acknowledge the role that Chavi Mathur, our colleague, has sort of played in this festival alongside Professor Sarah Ahmed. Not only in terms of designing the whole festival, but also inspiring and bringing a synergy that something like Center for Water Research needed for a very long time. So I do want you to give a round of applause for Chavi, for Professor Sarah Ahmed, and for my colleague, Vijaya. I also want to give a round of applause for all the colleagues from water sector who shared their apprehensions about joining the event in person and are here from different corners of Pune, especially Shailaja, Joy, Saili, Nidhi, colleagues from VIT, PVP Architecture School, and many others that I have myself personally met in last 3 days. So thank you so much for sharing, for being so generous with your time, with your insights, and with your knowledge with us. Today's panel on livelihood and culture, we can see it is coming alive even in this forum where we are discussing water, bringing our own professional domains, but also the insecurities, anxieties, and the embodied affective elements around water in this session. We have 3 presentations today. We will have 10 minutes presentations. So I will directly invite the panelists one by one, but we will, after the presentations are over, then we will have a round of open interaction towards the end for around 30 to 40 minutes. So may I please invite the first team, which is led by Professor Vijaya Niranjan. But first I want to introduce the other 2 younger members. One is Meenal Sagare. Am I pronouncing correctly? Sagare. Sorry, Marathi is still learning. She's an architect and urban designer and also program coordinator for the postgraduate course in urban design at VIT's PVP College of Architecture. Then we have Niranjan Garde, who is an architect trained at British Columbia in Canada and currently works as associate professor at the PVP College of Architecture. What is interesting is that his works explores the embodied and effective elements around the built environment. And finally, the one who would be presenting the work that this team has done around the hills and pastoral communities, I welcome Professor Vijaya Srinivasan, who is an architect and academic and brings more than 30 years of experience to this field. She teaches varied subjects related to design and technology at the PVP School of Architecture. And not to mention, she does have a soft spot for interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach. So we will bring that out later in the discussion, but now to the story.
Yeah, thank you, Shalini. Yeah, you called me young, and I'm very hurt about that, that I'm no more young, actually. Thanks, Atan, for the lovely introduction. I want to first thank IISER, LWM, Dr. Sara Ahmed, Chavi, Vitamin D. It's endless, actually, the list, everybody who have supported us for this presentation, because I think it's more of a collaborative thing, because all of us are looking at the same methods may be different, but goal is the same, is what I feel. And we have had excellent interactions in all the presentations, discussions which were happening, with very good concrete feedback, which could help us take it ahead. Yeah, that's a cute little slide that we have, which we begin with. There's no way you can be an atheist with that slide. You tend to believe in things which are good, actually, I would put so, whether you call them God, whether you call them water, but they are something which is good for the humanity, is what I would put it. And our entire story actually is talking about people, the stories which are connected to people, which are rustic deities, which we are talking about. So there are a lot of very interesting mythological stories which are connected, and they all culminate with water as something which is trying to bring them together. You put them under livelihood, you put them under festivals, you put them under, there's a lot of engagement between them. If you keep unearthing, there are multiple things which start happening. And if you say it's highly complex, if you look at it in terms of a research, but if you put yourself in their perspective, in their shoes, for them, it was something which was very simple and straight, because it was talking about a human connect. And that is what we felt is something we would like to maybe stress upon more in terms of our presentation. So our entire story, we have, yeah, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, so our entire story is talking about two major locations, I would put so. Also, there are situations, one which is talking about the hills, which are talking about the place which is Pune. So there are hills which are there. At the same time, there's a lot of water which is there, which we are trying to look at tracing water, which are not only rivers which are visible, but we are also talking about water which is not visible, which are in the form of maybe atmospheric, there is a lot of moisture, dewdrops, streams, streams which are maybe not visible during when it's not raining, but they suddenly come up when there is raining. Now, these are things which we realized in our study are something which these people who are from the community, who are either at the hills or what we call as the laplands, which are closer to the foothills, they knew about this. They knew this wisdom because their entire life was dependent on that in terms of where there is more water, where there's less water. My livestock requires water. People who are from my community require water. So it invariably, we felt this is like our story. It's not their story, but it's something like our story, because our life also ideally should revolve around that your life is sustained because of water, and there are ways of procuring, and it is not something which is you pay for it, actually, which was the discussion, I think, which happened last time, that you don't pay for it. It is something which is available, but you need to acknowledge it. You need to respect it. You need to consider it in a particular way. You cannot exploit it. You need to share it. And these are all things which started coming into picture when we were talking about the community. So when we talk about water as a cultural landscape, the two communities that we are talking about, one is the hill. So all the pastoral communities, which are dangars, all who are moving on the hills, basically. And they are in search of water. And there are a lot of rustic deities, which we would call it, which are part of that community, which could be named as Masobas, Matobas, Vetal. There are so many gods that start coming up. And if you look at them, they are all not very, very sophisticated in terms of, but they are present. They're, you actually, you can't miss them if you look at it. But a lot of times when we were walking around these places, especially the one where we went to Aund, the river near Aund, and we realized that we saw the Satyastra, the next one which is there, and we asked, okay, there should be a Masoba, and a lot of people didn't know about that. And there was a fisherman who was there, and we asked him Masoba. So he said, oh, ahena, just clear that little hedge which is there. And he cleared that, and he said, Masoba. He's always there. It's there in their mind. So these are things which are so interestingly ingrained in their history, actually, in their own understanding of the place. So we said, okay, let's start looking at that as one of the major, or understand water through their perspective. Yeah, move to the next slide. So we moved to the first part, which is the hills, where we said it's like in search of water, basically, where you are trying to search water, and they are water which are under favorable conditions. Because a lot of times you realize that these people, the history that we were trying to understand, and when we were talking to people, they were not in looking for water which is abundance of water every time, but it is more to do with water which is favorable, so that the sheep can move easily. The hoofs you can travel easily. So they are looking for water which is more favorable, actually, and not saying lot of water. So they would start moving from, say, I think I need a little water. Life starts with that and ends with that, actually. Yeah, thank you. So they started moving towards that, and we realized that these people who are moving with their cattle, they are very clear about that, whether the cattle or the sheep can move in that soil which is there. Is it too moist? Do they find it difficult to walk? So they would move wherever it is easy for their livestock to move, and where there is abundance in terms of what is required for the cattle and for their people. So it was almost like stating there was what you call as a search, which was with which they are moving ahead with water. In that, yes, we found out right from Vetal to Masoba, Matoba, all these gods were something which were coming every time we would meet these places where these people are. These gods also are accompanying them. And there are very interesting mythological stories which start coming up, which is moving from Konkan till Wakad, and one which is moving from Wakad to Matobagad, and you will all see that these gods are traveling along with the community. And it's an interesting sort of a combination which starts working up, because there are very good stories or very interesting stories in terms of that the devotee is telling that, please take me to where, the god is telling the devotee, take me to where water is. So he would say, okay, let me take you somewhere where there is water. So these are stories which are so interesting that immediately the value of water becomes very, very important. And it does not remain as just a religious understanding. It is something much more, because people, God, everything started moving together with water. And then there are stories which connect with that he got married, then he settled at one place. Wherever they settle, it is somewhere sometimes closer to the water body. So there are places where they settle also. And you will see that there are these temples. Until today, there are a lot of places where jatras are there, actually, because they are trying to preserve these memories which are there, in terms of that these are the moments which are there. And there are jatras which are performed every year, which I think the one which is now is somewhere just next month, basically, I think 16th or 17th of April. And people walk on that path just to relive that memory of the value of water, basically, and gods along with that. So it is a very interesting cultural landscape, and festivals, everything is connected in that cultural plot. It cuts across all barriers, actually, I would put, because it is talking about people, their celebrations, their gods, their engagement with other communities. So it cuts across all the geographical boundaries. There are no political layers at times. And it becomes a very interesting movement, which is celebrated till today, actually. Yeah, can you move to the next, please? Yeah, then, yeah, thank you. So the next is basically what is when it's closer to the foothill. Actually, I think where we are also, there is one which is very close. There is the Satyasra, which is on the NCL road, is very close to where IISER is basically, where water becomes, it almost gives you an anchorage. It tells you, okay, this is where you need to stop now. And water is a signifier actually, because it is something which is talking about water which has got a little depth. It's like there is more, it's like a gene pool which is created. There's a huge ecology which is prevalent there. The ecosystem is, biodiversity is very, very rich out there. And they are like signifiers. So as you keep moving maybe uphill, you will find more places like that. And as you keep coming closer and closer to the city, you would realize that these are places which are completely getting destroyed, disturbed, because of a lot of pollution which is coming up. So these indicators or these signifiers which were there earlier are something which is almost talking about the ecosystem, which right now as currently it is not getting established at all. And we found a lot of places where these things are disturbed completely. So here we would see the signifier or the presence of the another rustic deity which comes in is the Satyasra who comes in, who are called as the 7 goddesses. Or they are closer to the water. They are present at a level which is, in case of a flood or during monsoon, you don't see them actually. But when the floods are, or the post-monsoon or much before monsoon, they emerge because they are much lower, at a much lower level. And even today, women go and worship them at certain specific, it's always after the rains, you would notice, not when the floods are very, so you would say don't go there during that time. But you will see these people are coming there, doing worshipping them. So there is a present of this Satyasra which comes in, who are worshipped, prayed, and a very simple method of praying actually. So they would give maybe a coconut, a blouse piece. There's something which is very, very simple. There's nothing which is very high-fi, which is, no, you need to create a structure, nothing like that. Yeah, so here we found out that the fishermen who are there, they are the people who are connected to that Satyasra, and a lot of fishing community who are very closely associated to that are the people who are connected to these places, which is Satyasra. And along with that, you would also see Masoba, which is parallelly with, along with Satyasra. Yeah, can you move to the next? Yeah, and the third one, which is which is more in Kambleshwar, where we went, where there is an encounter, which we call it as an encounter, or where they come together actually. And that is more to do with, we felt water became almost like faith, which is there. And here the two communities started coming together, and there are a lot of festivals which were happening at that time. Right from, it's usually post Dashera when we went, that people were coming there, and there were a lot of people who are newly married, or women would come there, and there's a puja which would be connected with water, where the colis would be the part of that, and certain things would be given as offering to the water. And when it's given as an offering, whatever is given as an offering is something which the colis, they have the right over it. So there was this interaction which was happening between the community which is coming from the Dangas basically, and right from Telangana, they are all coming there. And the river, which is the colis, those people are there. Time? Yep, sorry. Yeah, so these are some of the rituals which is there as a part of the museum actually. So it's more elaborate in that. Yeah, can you go to the next? Yeah, so we are looking at water as a value system, basically. It's a part of the value system. And there's a very short video which we would like to play. It's a 2-minute video which this is at Kambleshwar. River Nira, at the turning of the river Nira. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijaya, with this very interesting presentation on how values are shaped by material realities, but also have the potential of shaping and transforming the material lived realities around us. I now invite our next panelist, Prajakta Divekar, who is a senior PhD fellow at the Humanities and Social Science Department at IISER Pune. She is also engaged with public engagement and advocacy work on heritage issues in Pune. And one of her projects around Pune Heritage Walks has also won a national award in terms of the public engagement potential. The presentation and her story is around the city, but also how the city intersects with these various knowledges that coexist and transforms the urban culture and urban spaces to the effect that the space is becoming more and more flood prone, and what implications does this changing scenario have for all of us. So may I please invite Prajakta.
So my story is named Pune Paradox. What is Pune Paradox? We were talking about how do we show people's relationship with water in Pune today. And this story is evolved out of many ideas of, focusing on floods, focusing on groundwater, and how do we show these connections together. Yes, I'm not audible. Okay, I'll try. Is it the mic or me? Yeah. So, am I audible now? No? Okay, I'll shout. What is the Pune Paradox? So what we see in the newspaper these days are two things. One is we see that with every monsoon cycle, we see devastating floods in Pune. We have visuals of different areas flooding and the kind of loss of property and life and issues around flooding. there are studies, recent studies that show that these episodes are going to increase in number because Pune is witnessing heavy rainfall in short duration, and that is causing a lot of potential for urban floods. But at the same time, what you read in papers is that the groundwater level is depleting and we are soon to head for water crisis. Now, these two things, how do you really connect these two things where there's too much water over ground, disrupting civic life, and you are then looking at really low groundwater levels and heading towards water scarcity? So we started to make these connections. And what I realized was this is from March 26. And you see what it says is villages around Pune city are going to be facing water scarcity this year. So what the study does is the study is actually, it moves visually. So what you're going to see when you look at the real story on the LWM website is that through visuals, through rendering visibility, like the theme of this year, groundwater is rendering the invisible visible. So what the story does is through an experience of floods and various other visuals, we take you to what it really means and what it really looks like and make connections that are now we are seeing more and more apparent and which were actually not there before in the public discourse. People spoke of groundwater separately, people spoke of floods separately, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we have started to now talk of them as, as linked with each other. And so the questions that the story asks is, why is the city with network of rivers and streams that form the watershed area headed for a water crisis? Very often we see people talk about, Pune, they start with Pune saucer shaped and they speak about surrounded by hills and so on. But what does this topography really mean in terms of the natural resources? Where does, what do these hills do to the kind of resources that Pune city draws in terms of water? So the story looks at how we are located in the watershed area and what does that watershed area mean, and how when we say that we are surrounded by hills, what we are actually talking about is a variable gradients, that the water is drained down, and therefore how the topography is very important to the sustainability of the city itself. The second question we ask is, why is it that the city that is naturally not prone to flooding is experiencing severe disruptive floods? Now, when we start to ask these questions, we see that we are forced to draw certain connections. And this, so this presentation does exactly that. It connects a lot of issues. It connects floods with groundwater. It connects where we live to how we live. It connects land and water because these two things are often talked of as if they are isolated. We speak about different kinds of floods. Now, before the recently there has been a report on causes of floods and different measures to cope with these. And it's in that report, you will find that there is an identification of different kinds of floods that Pune has. Otherwise, if you see the media reports and so on, there's a blanket thing, there are floods in the city, but there are different kinds of floods. And then the story looks at what are these different kinds of floods. And what it does is connects dams and floods as well. So this story actually looks at, we start from 1961. All of us know about the Punyache Dam burst and the floods caused by that. Now, if you look at everything that's been written about this episode, about this event, you see that over and over, the focus has been on the human dimension, the loss of life, people narrating stories of, or, witnesses. I witnessed this, I was here, what happened at that time, and so on. And you see a lot of these human narratives. But what is missing from a lot of these narratives, which I didn't come across, was this connection that the flood was caused by dam bursts. And Pune is surrounded by 5 dams. And the possibility of flood always remains, because it's not, we've seen in recent times up in Uttarakhand also, where dam burst has caused huge flood and the kind of disruption. And you see that, so when I was doing this and I checked the disaster management report of Pune Municipal Corporation, and they do identify the worst kind of disaster that the Pune city can have is the burst of Khadakwasla Dam. So we need to take cognizance of this connection between the dam and flood. And therefore, when we talk about the event as one-off thing, and often talk only in terms of the effects of floods, what we also need to take into our mind is the fact that we need to also be very careful. I remember a few years ago, I think in 2019, when there were heavy rainfalls, and even in the catchment area, there was a rumor that went around that Temghar Dam is also going to burst, or there's a crack or something. And then later on, that rumor was, of course, a rumor. But the possibility of it remains, and the story draws attention to that. It also gives you visuals of the kind of experience that 1961 flood was. There are 3 narratives that you can go through. There are blogs that were written, and so we've woven them. What you see is what the flood has done in terms of the urban development of Pune city. So you do see that certain areas have come about after the flood, particularly as a part of the rehabilitation program. And today you see them become pet areas. And then very recently, the ones who were rehabilitated actually got the land that they were staying on legalized, in a sense that they were not permanent landholders, but they were given the rights to the land that they were living in very recently, about 2 years back. So what you do see in the story are these little things of what the flood does, how it links to people's life, and how it links to the city. It also goes into the urban floods, the floods that we see more often today with each monsoon cycle. And there are visuals of 2000 floods in 2005, 2015, 2019. And we have taken, also thanks to Jeevit Nadi, who really went ahead and documented 2019, but we have visuals of the kind of loss that floods cause. And while in fact, in 2019, we also saw how they impact not just the rich, but also the poor. I mean, otherwise, it's usually we talk about the loss of it in terms of slums and the houses that broke and so on. But even the rich this time were affected in the societies and so on. So what you do see is that while some have the capabilities to deal with it and start their lives, others have to restart it, and how they have to build it bit by bit. So the kind of human loss that is there. And then the story moves on into the causes of floods. And we look at different causes. We see these are things from the story, so you'll see them in greater detail as you go through them on the website. But so there's a 1986 riverbank, and you see how the riverbank was, how wide it was, and also you see how you have the gradients that I was talking about, the variable gradients, and how it drains into the lowest point in topography, which is the river, and what has happened to that bank today. And then in this, I think in LWM, we also had discussions on riverfront development and so on. So that's what we are looking at as, something that's proposed for the future. But you see a river that's completely polluted, river channels that are concrete. You see even, so on top, you see this Bapucha Zhara, where you have the natural stream that drains into the river that's completely polluted. And so this is the plight of the river today. We also look at one of the important reasons the report on causes of flood highlights is encroachment and debris dumping. And we see that this is a picture of Ambelodha. This is somewhere on Dev Nadi or Ram Nadi, I guess. And what is interesting also that when the story is making connections, what we see is the trail of destruction in 1961, the pictures that you see something like that, taken from the web, and compare them with 2016, the trail of destruction that is left behind. And you see so much plastic that was left behind. And in fact, in 2016, you could not have missed this site. There was just a lot of mud, lot of silt coming, and the kind of flood was, there was heavy rainfall in the catchment area. So the dams had allowed the water to flow in, and you could see, and people came, you do this every year, that when the water's let out, people are excited because the Mura Mutha look like how they would naturally be flowing. So people go there to see, and the evening bridges. But seldom do you find people crowding over there to see what happens when the water recedes. And this is a kind of trail of destruction. And what you do notice is that in 1961, you don't see so much of plastic and all. You do see mud, you see wood, you see broken parts of houses and so on. And what you see in 2016 is this. So you see the extent of pollution. What this story tells you is that very often the argument that people make when we talk about environment and cities is that, well, you're living in a city and cities change all the time. So, why make a fuss about it? Change is constant. But what the story actually makes an argument for is that the pace of change is not constant. And today, because the pace of change is so rapid, and I don't need to actually say this because all of you from whichever part of the city that you're coming from, you know that so much construction is happening around you all the time. Heavy capital infrastructure projects, or you have, highway projects, you have construction, building construction that is happening. So rapidly, there's just the pace of development has been just way too rapid. And that is when you see that these connections are becoming apparent. So even to a common person who, would not know so much about what goes into groundwater levels depleting and so on, what you do see commonly are sites like these. So the story focuses on a case study of Baner Pashan area, where where you get to see this right now as you go around the areas. You have the Ram Nadi that is flowing through these areas. And there's so many reports to tell you that Ram Nadi is shrinking because of debris dumping, concretization and encroachment. And there have been movements in past, protests by citizens to get rid of the encroachments, to allow the river to flow. And in fact, one of the times in past, PMC had written a board calling it a Nala. So there was a Ram Nala, and someone had to be reminded that this is not a Nala, it's a river. So you have that in this area. And at the same time, you have the hills, which is the Pashan Hill complex, which has been excavated like this. And what you do see here are aquifers. So when I was doing this story, there was a section in it where aquifers were explained. And then there was a feedback that, people do know about aquifers. But what we learned while we were doing this story is that people don't know about aquifers because they're invisible. Because a layperson might know that there's, that hills store water and so on. But how do they look like? Unfortunately, you get to see them today when the hills are exposed like this. And in the story that you will see on the website, you will also get to see a little video where what you hear is a huge sound of construction. And there's at the same time an aquifer that's water's gushing out of it. And that's the voice you don't hear. That's the sound that you don't hear in the thing. And all that you're hearing is you'll see that there's just a whole lot of, you see the water over here. This is all from the aquifers. And this is how they gush out. Now this otherwise would have gone into a stream, or it could have, eventually led into the river and so on. Now, when these streams are blocked and the aquifers are dried like this, there are many things that can happen. One is that there's no water, so the soil cannot hold, and you can have landslides at places, which is also a real outcome of such a thing. You also have water problems. How are aquifers formed? They are the ones that produce groundwater and store groundwater and provide. So you have disruption of what these are like shallow aquifers. I'm sure that those who have been attending different talks in past, I think Mr. Himanshu Kulkarni also spoke about it before. So what in fact, he also spoke about the fact that this Veta this Veta hill complex, the entire hill complex is one of the largest shallow aquifers in an urban area that you see in Western Maharashtra at least. So it is very important for us to make these connections, because unless we do that, we won't be able to solve our issues. And how that has happened today is the story covers this case study of Baner Pashan. It also talks about in very recent times, maybe a year or two, what happened is the societies in Baner Pashan area, most of them have bore wells, and the bore wells started to show very low levels of water. So the societies got worried because clearly they live on tanker economy. And there were efforts along with the civil society that were undertaken to recharge the groundwater level. What they realized is while they were doing that, they were also able to solve the problem of flooding in their societies. So those connections became apparent when the society started to work on it. Now this activity, this is very new, and I believe there are organizations who are working with resident welfare associations and so on. So what you do see over here is that the citizens are making these connections and are actively addressing these issues, and they have support of civil society. What the government needs to do is also to support these efforts and formalize them. So this is what the story is about, and you will get to see the entire story with a lot more visuals and videos when you visit the LWM website. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
And now we have the final presentation. So we have been dabbling with this idea of Punyache Paani, but what does this really mean? And we have with us KJ Joy, who is a senior fellow at Society for Promoting Participatory Ecosystem Management. He is also a coordinator of Forum for Policy Dialogues on Water Conflicts in India, and is a member of Vikalp Sangam. You're making me nervous, Joy. Okay, I've come prepared. Give me time. Okay, so Vikalp Sangam, which is basically a consortium exploring ideas, alternative ideas around development and related sectors. So Joy, I believe your presentations would grapple into the meaning of Punyache Paani, and hopefully this is going to lead to some important, powerful, morally compelling, but also deeply disturbing questions for us.
Good evening, friends. Am I audible? Yeah. Thanks, Shalini. So I really enjoyed both the presentations. I mean, in fact, I think earlier also I told them when we had a bit of a dry run of the session today, saying that the whole co-evolution of the biophysical realities around you and the cultural, spiritual values, systems, traditions, symbols, etc., as an important part of how do we look at these things. In fact, when we are doing a research project in Varna River Basin, which is part of the Krishna, we also try to look at one of the pastoral communities. They're called the Dage Dangar, which is a buffalo rearing community, and who have been triple displaced. One is when the dam was built, the Varna Dam was built. Then there is the Chandoli National Park came up, and it's also an earthquake-prone region. Now, how such disruptions from your own ecosystems actually change your patterns of life, symbols, meanings, and your connectivity, and also how do you have differential understanding of these things in terms of your, for example, age. The way the older people feel connected. In fact, when they got displaced and they came to the rehabilitation sites, they brought saplings from their area and tried to plant it and have a connectivity to that ecosystem. But if you talk to the younger people, probably there's a disruption to that. And similarly, in the second presentation, looking at floods or other type of realities around us, like whether it is scarcity or aquifers, river systems, and things, and how that historically changes, or the type of narratives which comes, and connecting that with the type of developmental paradigm which we have, the political economy of the city, and now culminate with the RFD or riverfront development, which I think is going to one of the issues which we are all grappling with. Shailaja is sitting here. We have a group which is working on these issues. Is the whole question of, for example, the floods, and also its downstream impact. In fact, one of my arguments in this session, my presentation, is that we just cannot look at Punyache Paani from as a Puneker's perspective. We also need to look at from a basin perspective. And there are also people downstream of Pune who are dependent on this, the same water source and things. Now the type of 4 barrages which is going to come up on this, just around this RFD, what is going to do with the downstream flows and people who are dependent on that flows for their lives and livelihoods is something which to be considered. So I really enjoyed both the presentations. I only tried to build up from there, and I broadly agree with the propositions you both presented. So I really didn't know how to title my presentation. So I said this is going to be ramblings to some extent. It's not a very organically linked type of presentation, but I have a couple of points to talk about this whole theme which we have today. So the issue is that when we say Punyache Paani, what does that mean? I do agree that it's a very emotive, very evocative title. As a Punekar, to say that Punyache Paani is very evocative. But it also means that the type of water the Punekars use today is owned by the Punekars, which I think is something which we need to problematize. Now, just to put some numbers, and don't go by this number, these are broad numbers, they can change, but it's more like a placeholder. Now, how much is Pune's water? Now, one quick calculation my friend and colleague Neha did was that we have something around 176 million cubic meter of water. Now, it's a very simple calculation. You multiply the geographical area of Pune by our average rainfall, you get this much of water. Now, this does not mean that we can harvest this entire water. Probably not even 50% will be able to harvest as surface storages or as aquifers and other type of thing. So what we are talking about, even if you have been able to, harvest the entire water, which is not possible and neither is it desirable when we talk from a riverine perspective and things. Now, look at our use today. Punekars are today using, just for your domestic use today, something to the tune about 409 million cubic meter of water, which is equivalent to something about 1100 million liters per day. And this is going to go up to something like, when you talk about the estimation for 4041 is going to be nearly doubling this. Now you can see that where does this water come from? The issue is that, and also you have a groundwater which Himanshu provided. I mean, Himanshu's name is being taken quite often in this house today, so I should also take. So he gave me a broad number saying that the current extraction level is something to the tune about 113 million cubic meter. And what we call the replenishable or the sustainable replenishability annually is about 42 million cubic meter to something like about 57. So which means that we are not owning this water. When we talk about Punyache Paani, I think we should take a little more humbler, little more relative stance on this. So the question comes, where does the remaining water come from? And whose expense this water comes? Whose lives and livelihoods impacted by the type of unlimited use of water which the Punekar used to? And I can give you some numbers. Like today in Pune, the average use per person is to the tune of about 200 liters per day per person. And it can also go up to 300 depending on where you live. And also it can go much lower. So the average is actually quite a problematic thing because it hides the extremes and things. So we also know that the people who live in the informal settlements do not get access to this water, and also they pay much higher than the type of water they get and things. So I think this slide, the numbers you might change slightly depending on the type of source use and things, but it gives you a broader order of magnitude figure of this. So actually, we are saying like Punekars are living on somebody else's water, and this should actually be able to critique our own behaviors and other related things. My proposition connected to that, unless we look at, in fact, even the other two presentations, you have to really look at the complexities they brought into the whole thing. Now, for example, within the Pune city, probably you may not get a Dangar community. If you have to really look at a Dangar community, you need to step out of Pune. So unless we locate Punyache Paani in the larger basin, not only Bhima I'm talking, I'm also talking about the Krishna basin in which Bhima is located. Because Pune city is in the upper watersheds, is in the upper reaches of the entire basin, and the way the Punekars treat its rivers, the way Punekars consume the water, and the way the Punekars actually discharge the water actually impact the entire basin. In fact, that is what I'd like to come back. Later, it's one of part of the important biophysical characteristics of water is that the upstream people's behavior, actions can really impact the downstream and things. And so really we have to bring out the entire contestation around the different interests, different water uses and things, and also to see where does this water come from. Then we need to really put Punyache Paani in the larger context of our river basin. Now, what does this mean? So I would say that water needs to be seen as both as a local and a non-local resource. Local in the sense that, okay, you also generate water at certain micro scales, like a micro watershed, for example, within a village, etc., which you can call as a local water. But that micro water is also connected to your entire basin. And whatever activity you do in a micro basin, in any part of the basin can have basin-wide impact. That's why we call water is a connected resource and things. Very often the NGO discourse, we always say that water is a local resource. The local communities have the entire right to the way you use or abuse that water and things. But I think if you see water as both as a local and a non-local resource, then the entire discourse around what is right to water, for example, how do we see these things? And how does the river flow? Ecosystem flows. Otherwise, we have these slogans, both in Hindi and Marathi. Gaucha Paani, Gau Mein. Shet ka Paani, Shet Mein. But this is important slogans for water conservation, but that does not actually capture the entire complexity around what we are talking about. I think we need to rise above some of these localist conceptions about water. Then only we can capture some of these dynamics around water and things. The second important thing that we all know this. I mean, I'm not talking anything new. I mean, we're looking at the key. Water also has a unidirectionality. We all know, for example, water river flows are according to certain gradients, water flow from upstream to downstream. But the important issue is that the relationship between the upstream and the downstream is asymmetric, which means it's not equal. The Punekers who is in the upstream of this watershed can impact the downstream people, but people in the downstream cannot impact the Pune. So this is the type of unequal relationship we have. And this also has then implications for the type of institutions we craft to manage the water, etc., etc. I mean, you can go into the details of some things, but within the time we have. So this is also giving rise to very increasing number of conflicts and contestations. In fact, that is one of my area of work. There's a national network on conflicts, which is working on this. And there's a book which you brought out called Water Conflicts in India, A Million Revolts in the Making. In fact, you step out, you can see all different types of conflicts which is unfolding around us. In fact, this visual, this is, I think it's about 2011. I'm sure some of the older people in this house will know this, where 3 people died on our own express highway. What was the issue there? I mean, this is our own Pauna River ka Paani. The issue was that the Pimpri-Chinchwad Municipal Corporation wanted to change the way they extract water to feed this. Instead of the barrage they have downstream of the Pauna Dam, about 10 kilometers or something, they want to directly lift the water from the Pauna Dam. Now, both the people, the farmers had their own argument saying that if the water comes 10 kilometers down, their wells gets recharged, and they also extract water through, river bed pumping, etc., etc. The PCMC also had its own argument saying that, within this 10 kilometers, the water get polluted because of open defecation, etc., etc. And people also extract illegal extraction and things. But it all resulted in such a huge conflict, and the issue is still not resolved. And you also have either Punekar sitting on Dharna here because they feel they don't have enough water. And if you go a little down in Sholapur district, where the Ujjini Dam is there also there's a conflict because people are saying that we are not getting enough water. The issue is not only about how much water they get or allocation, the issue is also about the type of the quality of water which is being said. In fact, we have the adjoining taluka here called Purandar. Some people might have heard about Purandar taluka for the Pani Panchayat experiment and things. There are 2 lift irrigation schemes there called, one Purandar lift irrigation scheme, and the second is called Janai Shirsai lift irrigation scheme. Both the intake wells are downstream of Pune. You can go and visit there. The water smells. You can't even stand that water. The entire aquifer, the entire groundwater that has been now today polluted because this water which is coming there. So these are the type of things we are playing. So I think we need to look at a little more critically about, there are many other type of conflicts there which are not getting into this. So my plea is that we need to relook at it from a water justice perspective, equity perspective. There are many dimensions into that. I don't want to get into this now. One is internal equity within the city. I think all of us know who are working in the city or living in the city know that the locational advantage and disadvantage of in getting to access of water is very clear. Second, there is also a question of basin level equity. Today, when we design a rural water supply, we talk about 40 LPCD, 60 LPCD. But when you talk about a city planning, we talk about 194, 200, 300. So this type of inequitable access to water, this I'm talking about for just for life. That is for the base, what you call the lifeline water, which you are talking about. This is something. There is also a question of conflict around intersectoral allocation, agriculture versus urban use and industry. In fact, Prayas done a good study some years back saying that out of the 48 to 50 irrigation projects, today more than 3,000 million cubic feet of water has been diverted from the agriculture use to urban water and industrial use. And when I say 3,000 million cubic feet of water, it means that nearly 300,000, that is 3 lakh hectares of irrigated agriculture and the people and their livelihoods and things. So one side we talk about farmer suicide, and on the other side we talk about taking this water away from this. I'm not saying that urban people don't need it, but I think we need to take a little more rational stand on this, how much water is being done. And also we need to also look at saying that out of this 194 on an average, which we are using in Pune today, how much is the lifeline water? There are global estimates to it. In fact, a person like Peter Blake says that it's not more than 25 to 30 liters. Now, where does the rest of the water go? This is what we call luxury use. Now, I don't want to get to the discussion of luxury use. We all know how does that play out and things. So, and also there's a question of intergenerational equity. The moment we are going to go deeper and deeper into the stock and living not within the annual, what we call our water cycle, then we are also digging into stocks that have been built up through geological years or thousands of years and things. So we are really dipping into our capital and things. Second, I think is that in fact this is something which are also doing the new national water policy, which I've been part of drafting it and things. It's not in the public domain. In fact, we are also trying to conceptualize water use prioritization in a very different manner, saying that water needed for lifeline, we are not using the word domestic use, because under the rubric of domestic use, everything gets justified today. So at least for the lifeline use and for the ecosystem flow, that's the first 2 important takes. And only after meeting the needs of that, then water should flow for other needs, like for example, livelihood. And after meeting all these things in a sequential manner, water should flow in maybe commercial or other type of use. And so there's a different way of conceptualizing this. And also we are arguing in the policy saying that most all your non-lifeline water use should be shifted to recycled water, and that is possible. In fact, I think Pune itself generates something about 500 to 600 mld of sewage water today. Even if you treat that, at least 50% of that, I think quite a bit of this non-lifeline water needs can be met in Pune. So the whole question of use of recycled water to meet non-life. The last couple of slides is I just want to dwell. It's just not my area of work, actually. I'm trying to get into this whole question of cultural, spiritual sphere of rivers and water in this just last 4 or 5 years and things. Now, we all know that, I mean, I think for this, instead of me, maybe Shailaja should speak on this. Like all our confluence and origins of rivers are all very basically, spiritual landscapes and things. Few years back when we were doing a research on Varna Basin, I went to where the confluence of Varna with Krishna, it's a village near Sangle called Haripur. Now there's an interesting temple. Now this is not the old temple, this has been a renovated temple. Now once you go inside, what happens? Now this is the deity called Krishnai, in some place called Krishnabai. In fact, you can see this image, this temple in the length and breadth of Krishna, especially in the villages around in Maharashtra at least. Now you see a small encroachment there. I call it encroachment. I don't know what you people think. There are 2 more gods sitting there, that is Shiva and Parvati. Now this is a later addition. Now, this is what I'm saying. We talk about rivers being encroached by different people. But do we say that this is an encroachment of the local deities and the Bahujan traditions and Bahujan this? Why don't we call it then? In fact, this is happening increasingly over the country. And when we talk about cultures, And I think this is something which we need to, and especially in the present political context of the country, I think we need to really be wary about what is happening to all these things. I think we need to take a little, critical view about these things. I'm sure Maharashtra people know this Mangalashtak, right? For every marriage, at least the conventional marriage, we see this Mangalashtak. The second stanza of the Mangalashtak has all these famous rivers. No, Ganga, Sindhu, Saraswati, Yamuna, Godavari, Narmada, Kaveri, Sharayu, Mahendra Tanaya, Sharnavati, Vedika, Shipra, Vetravati, Masur Nadi, Khyata, Gaya, Gandaki. Now, the last sentence says that the waters from all these rivers, like a sea, we are going to bless this couple with that. So my question to you and many people is that where is our Krishna gone? Why does Krishna doesn't find a place in this entire spectrum of rivers? There can be different interpretations. And one narration I would like to say is that this is also mainly because Krishna River is also the place of a whole lot of non-Brahmin traditions in this country. And you can find right from the origins to Sri Shailam, all the Buddhist caves, Buddhist stupas, and all that for traditions and things. So it's not that accidental that, Krishna is not mentioned, because there are much smaller rivers which has been mentioned. So why is that? And I think as part of the Krishna Basin riparian community, we should be able to raise this issue. At least whenever we sing the Mangalashtak, I think we should include our river in that instead of something else. So I think these are questions which we need to raise. And also in Sri Shaila, if you see, that was the place of one of the Buddhist centers, in fact, very important philosophers. They have been there. They are also brought in this whole dialectics between what we call consciousness, which we call Neniv, and the unconscious level of mind, which is called the first one is called the Janiv, and the second, the unconscious level is called the Neniv. In fact, when we talk about de-class, de-caste, de-patriarchy and other type of thing, it's a change which we talk about in the conscious mind. Unless we change our own Neniv, our own unconscious level, our own Neniv about our river systems, then probably things are not going to change. So I think these are also site of Tantric Panth, for example, which really stood against patriarchy as well as the caste traditions. In fact, you have to get entry into the Tantric Panth. Then one of the conditions is that you are supposed to marry in an inter-caste marriage, especially from the erstwhile Dalit community. I mean, there are very interesting literature which is there, which you can go into and things. So this is my last. I think, how do we look at water and caste? I think this is something in the country which you need to seriously look. I'm not going to get detail, but this is a small poem. It's an extract from a poem from Namdev Dasal, who was one of the leaders of the Dalit Panther movement in the 60s and 70s in this country. So he said, and this is from his famous collection of poems called Gold Pita, and it has been translated by Dilip Chitra, who is also a very respected poet and writer. The fingers of thirst wither away while probing for edible beans, and man seeks compassion in a devastated body. The earth's mouth opens wide as a begging bowl. What a marvelous sight it is to watch your secular regimes wagging their tail. You will draw water upstream and we downstream. I think that's an important thing which I want to sing, that who draws water from the upstream and who from the downstream. Bravo, bravo, how you teach Chadur Varnya, even to the water in your sanctified style. And I think unless we engage with some of these issues, the real world, I think the flesh and blood of these things come. And on the side, I have put two pictures. I'm sure some of you would know what this picture is. This is Baba Saheb Ambedkar's picture on top. And this is the Chaudhar Talab in Mahad. If you know, Baba Saheb Ambedkar's the first political action was on water, trying to say that this talab should be open to the Dalits. And just below his statue, there's a saying which is written, they're saying that this struggle, this fight is just not for water. This fight is for fundamental rights as human beings. So today, I think that's the main issue, saying that when we talk about Punyache Paani and other type of thing, we need to take a little disaggregated view. And we need to place this issue in the basin context. We have to really capture that. And also we need to look at this water from a much more of a class, caste, patriarchy type of lenses to try to understand this. And I think that's where I stop. So I'm thankful to my friends in IISER. Sara is there, Vijaya is there, Shalini is there, with whom I worked. I do, we have done some work together. So thanks for giving me an opportunity, and all the colleagues, and also my colleague Neha, who gave me some map and some of the numbers, Himanshu, and also my colleague and comrade Dr. Bharat Patankar, who gave me some introduction to the caste and the social cultural traditions in the Krishna Basin. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. So I invite the panel to be on the stage, and also my co-moderator, Saili. We arrived at a beautiful formula. She will now coordinate the stage and we will coordinate the floor. So please, Vijaya, Meenal, Niranjan, and Prajakta, and Joy is already here. So while the audience frames the question, please take a minute. I also want to thank our colleagues from Science Media Center, who have been resilient in their effort to both live stream the sessions, but also do the final edits and everything. Thank you for your support and cooperation.
So we are in the last part of our session today, and I thank all the presenters, and it was indeed a wonderful, it was wonderful presentation which brought us glimpses of many Punes and many waters, Punyache Paanis, which coexist in Pune, right from the traditional livelihoods to present issues and the larger context which Joy has brought. And I really thank him for the kind of perspectives he brought, because even I wanted to ask few questions regarding those things. And also how it relates to the politics of water and limits to growth and things like that. So should I start asking few of my questions and comments maybe, and then maybe we can go to the question answers from the audience?
So I just want to have like quick reactions on how basically the key ideas that you want to communicate around environmental justice and sustainability through your own stories. So this is for the two panels, because Joy has been very extensive in those arguments in his presentation.
You can start. Yeah.
No, I don't think.
I would like her to repeat the question, actually. Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, so just the quick comments about your own quick comments about how your story, what questions around environmental justice and sustainability do your stories evoke in present times?
Okay. I may not be able to answer it directly as environmental justice and all that, but I would like to put it more maybe as a larger idea that we would be looking at. I hope I'm answering the right answer I'm giving, but it's a larger thing that we are trying to look at, because all three of us come from the domain of architecture, and therefore we are trying to see to it if it can be, if I put it directly, as a part of planning actually, because that is something which is, we felt in all our studies, we felt that there is a lot of ignorance, one, or they are not ready to accept what is visible. Community is actually ready to come and help us out with it. But right now there's a big friction which is there, and we really are trying to figure out what that friction is actually. But eventually I think what we would like is that it becomes a part of planning policy, so that these things are imbibed in the city actually and becomes more inclusive, which is not so. This is what I would put it right.
To add to that, definitely our story is coming from more of a cultural background rather than from a very socio-economic background. And to a certain extent, today we looked at water from the socio-economic perspective. Though we are architects, I'm urban designer also. So I would like to tend to answer it in from the socio-economic background, but I'll avoid that. And I try to respond to it more from, say, the cultural perspective. Because if we look at the story that we are trying to bring out is more of a cultural landscape, and the way the water is looked at is not only seen as a physical entity, but it is seen in a intangible aspect, the kind of say anchor it provided to the communities, the emotional association that it provided. So if we look at this intangible dimension of association with water, then perhaps these questions of say the idea of a distribution or distribution of water, or looking at it as a commodity to be consumed, they fall apart, and it gives us a fresh perspective to understand water. So that is how I would like to answer this question, that there is a whole lot of cultural dimension to water. I am really glad that Professor Joy talked about this aspect of Zaniv and Neniv, because that is very much ingrained in the sacred geography, and the kind of experience of water and the interconnectedness with the environment is explored through that idea. So, so I would still like to place myself in the cultural domain and try to respond to the water and the questions of water.
So I totally understand your thing about, like, we need to understand water as commodity, but also kind of acknowledge that water is much more as an intangible. It's part of the sacred landscapes and things like that. But don't you think that even today in various policies related to heritage, can we accommodate this aspect, and can we also bring any sort of right-based approach to this? Because the communities that you are talking about, see, Sati Asra represents the fishermen folks mainly, and then there are other allied communities which are associated, and Dhangars, the pastoral communities that you are associating with Masobas and Matobas. So somewhere, do you feel that because of modernization, there is an alienation from the connection, like the more focus is more on the ritual part of it, and the actual organic connection with the water is disappearing day by day? And do you think the mainstream rituals are kind of eroding the actual tradition and the direct connections with the water? And do the communities that you people have interacted with have any responses to that, or have any conscious about these processes? Because I mean, we cannot look them in isolation. Of course, we enjoy the story, we enjoy the narratives and the exoticity of it. But how do you place them in the urban context today is very, very important. And again, as Joy said, in the entire basin approach, we will have contesting communities wanting different things. Today, when we say community, it's a different. The Prajakta's community was different, your community is different. So how do you kind of negotiate these spaces? So would you, any of you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think so. It's a very, you can say it's a very big question. And there may be multi-pronged approaches to that. For example, I would say as far as the urban context is concerned, the start has to be from upbringing and education, like sensitizing the people about what water should mean to us in terms of livelihood, in terms of cultural aspects, and in terms of many, many other things. So one issue is about, or other one approach is about nourishment, about the value of water, and then, you know, how do you see it in the future? The second thing, I would say that it's an interdisciplinary approach. Like we require sociologists, anthropologists, architects, planners, biologists, environmentalists to collectively tackle this phenomenon of water, and then address the contestation which is happening because of difference of location, upstream, downstream communities. Who is the insider? What is the insider? What is the outsider? So there are issues which have to be tackled at physical level, cultural level, and even spiritual level, as Doctor was mentioning over here. Unless and until you approach the issues at all the three levels, a holistic approach may not be materializing. The third challenge that we feel, we were discussing with among the three of us, is that current, I mean, we are talking from the architect's point of view. So urban planning and urban design, which is also hell-bent in planning for the city or the community, per se. We realized it somewhere down the line that the tools need to be invented to make it all inclusive tools. Right now, the tool that we have in mind is that, there is a vision of the city, and then there is something called as land use patterns. There is something called as FSI. There is something called as a commercial exploitation. There is just one track vision for the city. But how do you diversify this vision in terms of policy framework? Like as Doctor was mentioning over here, this national water policy. When I heard it, I realized that the policy taps to see water from an ecosystem point of view. It's not my water or your water, but it's an ecosystem point of view. Then coming to livelihoods, then coming to domestic use, then coming to industrial use. So the point is that if the policy is changing to accommodate even these larger visions, which a tall order, I would say, then from this multi-pronged approach, maybe then we can do start to do a little bit of a justice to what water really means to different people who are a part of that game or who are outside the game. This is what I would chip in over here.
Yeah, just one small thing to what, it's a paradox actually that a lot of open spaces are, what he said, now there are some tools which are there that you need open spaces within a society. And we noticed that a lot of places, actually the river itself and the places next to the river is an open space. And everywhere there's a retaining wall and they have just completely ignored that open space, which is already available free actually, it is free. So it is there and people have privatized at certain places or put a retaining wall and completely ignored it actually. And at the same time within the society, they have that open space and then it falls into the norms and all that. So somewhere I think we are trying to contradict ourselves and not see what is visible to us is what I feel. Some changes have to be done. Yeah.
So the way I look at it is slightly different since the story has largely focused on urban context. The way I look at it is that, it's interesting that we know of a resistance movement around water for a long time, Narmada Bachao Andolan and so on. But in recent times, what we are seeing is resistance in the cities as well. And you have these reports that come saying Chennai is going to run out of water, Delhi is going to run out of water. And you see that with, alongside that, you have these things that 50% of the population in a state is going to start living in the cities. And here's a question of what kind of cities are they going to live in and what kind of issues are going to emerge. Secondly, what I feel is that, we cannot club all the resistance movement having one voice. Each one of them is asking for different things. And when you look at movements in the city, particularly led by a certain section of the society, middle class people, educated people, who are now feeling the pinch of things, where societies are spending monthly 1 to 2 lakhs on tankers. So they are kind of, there are people who are questioning, why am I doing this? I am paying already to the municipal corporation a water tax and still I have to pay more and this and that. And what is the kind of narrative that they are giving birth to is, why is this happening? And then they're looking at rivers, they're looking at all the sources. Oh, there's encroachment, there's debris. Now this is a class issue, right? You have to talk about. So what I feel is, we need to ask ourselves, have we adequately problematized the issue to see what kind of innovations can come out of it, innovative solutions can come out of it. So one of that's precisely why a very small example in the story is about what the resident welfare associations are doing. Now, what I feel is, given the current situation of governance, where every issue seems to be we are exceeding the capability of governance, whichever area you take today. And look at I don't need to explain, we all are experiencing it firsthand. So then in the wake of that, we need to look at alternatives. So governance of different kinds, civil society, other organizations, citizens, resident welfare organizations. And therefore, it is very important for us to simplify this entire discussion around water to make it bigger, to make it more about When you're talking about floods, you're also talking about something else, you know? And you see these connections happening today, at least in Pune, where I can tell you that groups are coming together. Groups that were working on hills are meeting groups that were working on rivers, are meeting groups that are working on groundwater, and they are looking at each other. Oh, I can connect this with this because hills are important for this. So I can use this path for negotiation. And what needs to happen, I feel, is that, you know, these groups need to really, and I think it is from here that you will see creative forces coming out, creative solutions coming out, you know, when they begin to exchange ideas, when they begin to make these connections and they begin to talk. So what is, I feel this is so new because my observation is that it has come in the recent few years. So it is yet to develop the language of negotiation, because, you know, when you are working with municipal corporation or so on, it's a very black or white. It's a very, the kind of negotiations are very rigid and they often don't leave spaces for anything more. So we need to find that language of how do we kind of talk about the problems around water such that it is inclusive. And what is also important, I feel, is that there are too many definitions of sustainability. What we need to see is what unsustainable looks like. And that is what actually what I've tried to do in the story is to focus on the how we become unsustainable. And all our documents, official documents, are about building Pune as a sustainable city. And I was shocked that amidst all of this, we are winning awards for being livable. So livable as in what, you know? So these are the ironies, and I feel that we need to somewhere problematize and make it more complex. Because unless we don't make it complex and break it down into various issues, we won't be able to know which of these can come together as a solution. That is how I felt about it even when I was developing it. So, and this, I can talk about cities. There are a whole lot of dynamics like caste issues and other things when you speak about, you know, other areas. But if you remember, the first slide that I showed was actually about how villages. I'll have, sure. Okay. Okay. So I'll just complete the sentence that I was talking, that the villages around Pune actually are facing the brunt of the kind of development that is happening in Pune. So, you know, the kind of connections that you also referred to. So that's all that I'm trying to say in terms of.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of brief remarks. I'm also part of the organizing group. So it's good that we have a final panel discussion where we have discussed in depth some of the issues that we flagged in the inaugural panel as well. Because we looked at the different issues that Pune faces. Also in terms of its, when Joy articulated the issue of Punyache Paani and then its connect to the peri-urban areas, upstream, downstream linkages and such things. So I think this was also something which was flagged initially in the initial session. And I think that is very important. And also look at the inequities and other distribution patterns inside the city. So if you look at official documents of ward-wise LPCD levels of computed by PMC, I mean, I would agree that it's all sitting well above the required minimum. But I'm sure there would be pockets which would be underserved, and we need to identify and document such areas. And also the part which are the basin level approach, because in the initial panel, it was Himanshu, and then the focus was more on what is beneath the aquifer. And oftentimes from my own perspective, I take a largely basin level perspective similar to Joyce. So I think that is really important. I think the exercise of Punyache Paani, as I understand, also I am sure Sarah would also agree with me, it's an ongoing process. And then I think some of these issues should also be documented. And I think more stories are also welcome to be documented in the city, and also it connects with its neighborhood, the peri-urban areas, along water, and also other interrelated aspects. So just wanted to flag that as a comment. Thank you. And I think the other point, also speaking to Prajakta, it's also good that the different civil society actors who are working on different areas like waste, transport, water are actually coming together. And I think that kind of a consolidated effort actually makes things happen, and I think make voices really heard. So that's also quite important, I thought.
Hello, I'm architect Manas Marathe. I have a question to Professor Joy. You mentioned about water inequity and its related to relation to caste. So my question is it a caste issue or a class issue, especially after independence? Because when we talk about inequity and if we see the political this thing, it is often you spoke about Chaturvarna and all those things. So it has been mostly the non-Brahminical people who have been there in the ruling class. And then in some cases, especially if you go to Konkan area, then it is also equally the Brahmins who are getting affected because it's so especially in post-independence, how do you see? Is it the ruling class or the ones who enjoy power, those who try to do this, or is it still a caste issue?
Anyway, Vijaya is, I think, more of a comment and try to supplement what has been discussed or complementing it and all. But what's your name, you said? Manas. So Manas' issue is related to the whole relationship between caste and water, for example. I'm not using the word Brahmins. I mean, anybody can be born in the Brahmin community. In fact, in our movement, we have a called Brajaj. Brahmin Jati Janam Lela. And it's not in my, where I'm going to be born. But I'm talking about an ideological system where called a Brahminical way of things. And there are different traditions in that. Now, whether caste plays or not, I'm not completely denying what you're saying. I'm sure you're also coming out of your own lived experience and things. So I do respect what you said. Now, I gave the example of 1927 where Baba Sahib Ambedkar in Mahad had a satyagraha. 15 years back, and we have documented that case, there's a village called Mangaon, maybe about 10-12 kilometers from Mahad. There was a water issue there. I'm sure you would know that in Maharashtra. I mean, Maharashtra is very progressive. We like that word. Even in the progressive Maharashtra, if you go into the rural areas and certain pockets, we see that there are two different water sources. One for the upper caste. Let's say that may also conglomeration of caste. I'm not saying it's one caste or something. And there are also water sources for the erstwhile untouchable caste. In Mangaon, what happened was that because of some issue in the village with the police patil, the water source which was used by the Dalits, the upper caste put human excreta into the waterway, into the source. Now, this is just 15 years back, independence, everything. All that is there. In fact, if you remember, in 70s, Baba Adav and others led a movement in Maharashtra called Ek Gav, Ek Panota. Means one village, one water source. Irrespective of such a social reform movement, even today, since we are working on water conferences, I can take to sites where this access is denied to people, and it also actually overlaps, maps on to our conceptual source of purity. What is pollution? Who can touch? Who cannot touch? All these issues. Now, it's not only on that context. You talk about a watershed development. In fact, we have another case study in Gujarat. It's a very small watershed development and things. There again, this whole question of caste and intersectoral water use and conflict come together. In that particular village, Ahirs and others, who is a much more landed type of people, when the watershed development took place, whatever the increased water they wanted to give for irrigation. In fact, Dalits who had another well for this, they said that they would like to take a well near the, what you call the water recharging structure there. In fact, there was opposition. And the NGO who involved had a compromise. saying that, okay, Dalits, you're saying we'll consider water far away from. So these type of overlapping spaces which you find between the social inequities, which I call historical inequities, and the present access to water. I can give you examples after example what happens in watershed development. Basically, the land where the upper part of the watershed, which is generally slopy land, less soil depth, degraded land, this is generally owned by the poorer people in the villages. And whatever the conservation is done, the price is paid by them. The dams and the whatever the type of water harvesting structures are built there. And the water, because I said it has a unidirectional flow, water appears in the discharge zone, which in the valley portion where the land is owned by the larger farmers, upper caste, even class caste coming together, all that. So you find unless you make institutional arrangements of equitable sharing, then the poorer pay the price and the richer benefit. So these type of stories are there. So I'm not saying that whether one is born in a particular caste or something, but this is the overall ideology, irrespective of 80 years, or now we have 75 years of independence and things we're celebrating. But I think caste still, and this is I can take you to places if you like. I can give you evidences in terms of written material saying that caste does play an important role in who gets access to water or not.
No, he has a question. Joy, I wanted you to look at the screen behind you for a minute. Oh, because we have done that story in terms. Yeah.
I'll also send you the case study which I've done. Okay. And can I just add one sentence which you said? In fact, when we did this documentation, we did a contract with one of the NGOs who have been working in that area, saying that please document this case study for the book. Both the parties signed the contract. We paid the money to them. After 2 weeks, they returned the money saying that, no, we don't want to get into this issue because if you get into this caste issue there, our remaining part of the work will suffer. So even as NGOs, we don't have the courage to face up to this. So that's it. I mean, since you said it, I just thought of adding to it. Yeah.
This is a student from an NID who put this graphic, we put it together as a graphic story.
Okay.
For the exhibition we launched last year on Mumbai's waters. Story, I think, there's 6 images, and then the quote. So in a way, we did it in an accessible way.
Very good. Yeah. I will send this link to people.
The artist name is Divekar. The artist name is
Divekar. The dam special, Bullshit Satyagraha. Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Sarah, for this. Yeah.
You brought it up and then I realized we had this story. Go ahead.
I would just like to.
You can take your mask off and ask the question, please.
I would just like to add on to what Joy said.
What's your good name, sir?
My name is Vedant.
Yeah.
So, like you said, who gets access to water depends on caste as well. From my personal experience, I come from Western Maharashtra, Satara and all. So in my village, our village is structured in such a way that the lower caste people, the Dalits, are on the outskirts of the village mostly.
They're not even the village.
Yeah, and so my village is on the banks of the Vena Nadi.
Right.
So they are mostly situated downstream, and we have an Oda where we get drinking water. Most of the village gets its drinking water from there, but the Oda is quite far from the settlement of the Dalits and all. So when you you enter the village from the southern area, so the first thing you see is since the road is structured like that, you see the Dalit settlement, and you don't see a very old source of water, drinking water. You see a new pump well which has been put in place some 20 years ago maybe. And when you move upstream towards the north, you find the old and the more prominent source of drinking water for the village, which the Dalit communities have not been able to access. Yeah, and all of the activities rituals or even washing clothes and utensils and all happens upstream, and they get all the polluted water. And this is not just the case for my village. It's like the case for like all of the neighboring villages like Nele and like Dhawadshi and stuff. So yeah, like I still feel like caste is a very major issue when it comes to access to water.
That if you look at the history of Pune city also, there have been water problems, and particularly in the areas where people from lower castes lived. They had to struggle to get water supply to their areas. And you have Mahatma Phule also, who you see, who even lost a PMC election. He had only 1 or 2 votes, one of his own on these issues. So maybe, but you do see that as in the history of Pune as well, in the city itself. So I just wanted to bring that to the notice that even
concluding remarks that any of the panelists wants to make?
I just want to add to this one, saying that some of these, I think you mentioned about negotiation dialogues and things. I think one of the issues which I find, engage the policies and other things, that we really do not have any legally mandated institutional spaces at different scales for people to come together, whether it is Dangar community, or it is fishers, or even peasants or other type of people, city people, to come together, negotiate. And this negotiation need to be in an informed manner, where I feel academics and researchers need to play a role. Otherwise, we don't have even data, what we're talking about. Not only at the national scale, even at the different scales of this we don't have. So unless we create such spaces for dialogues, experience sharings, and other things, and which is also has a base in your legal system, these things go parallelly. The government decides something, the civil society does something else, they never meet. So I think this is one of the gaps. I think if you have to really bridge all these things together, we need to build those collectives and things. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Sarah, I will say the last word. Do you want any of you say anything? No. Thank you so much. Do you want to say something? I just closed. So want to thank everyone for being here for the whole week. Those of you who've come Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to see some of the same faces and the kind of questions and discussions that we've had over the past week, plus the 2 walks last Sunday, and now inviting you all for the cultural event tomorrow evening. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the name of the hall. Radhika or someone else can do that. But I wanted to not respond to what Joyce said, because we've been old friends, we've worked together for so many years. I wanted to say that, and I said this in the beginning in my opening remarks, that Living Waters Museum has over the last couple of years been working around urban waterscapes. And when I started this museum idea in 2017, the way forward was to look at how we can use the creative arts, whether it is graphics, cartoons, music, theater, drama, to challenge the order, to turn the table upside down in a way that is acceptable in the kind of India, as we say very easily, the fascist India that we live in right now. Let's be upfront about it. But to do it in a way that lets the audience and lets the viewers ask those questions. Okay, as a museum, we don't take an ideological stand, whether it is the riverfront here or the Sabarmati, where I used to live for many years. We're very clear about that. That's we do not, but I think we all know politically where we're all coming from, and that's important to acknowledge. The stories and the editing that we've done with each contributor, I mean, they can tell you how many times we went back and forth with them. It's a process that took 6 months, what you're seeing as the website that Chavi and I have spent time with contributors to ensure that those critical questions are asked, that framing is done. And I think that, and I mean, I showed you the confluence, the story from Ambedkar's struggle for water as a human right. But when we worked last year in Bombay, we worked with the Pani Haq Committee. We worked with an artist from the Koli community, Parag, who is developing an archive on the work of the Koli community. So as a museum, if we can find ways of using the soft, what I call the soft power of art, of digital tools, of creative ways of thinking, and to challenge patriarchy, to challenge many other isms that we see around us, that's what we want to sort of do. I can tell you very honestly that even in the cyberspace, we were, a couple of years ago, we were being hacked every day. We were a site that was being used by hackers to, try their cyber skills. So now we just have to, so now we're very safe and secure, but that is something that we have to be careful of as well. I mean, you have physical things happening in physical space, we know that, but you have a lot of challenges that can happen in cyberspace. So the whole issue of cybersecurity as a museum, what you're saying, where you're saying it, how you're saying it, what's being picked up in social media, it's a line that we have to tread as well. So I want to say that this is the beginning. I really like the way that, Joy, you put the larger framing of the basin and the context. And I think that's great. And you and I have talked about ways that we can visualize some of these water conflict stories. And that's something we'd like to do now. Like I invited the students of IISER on the first day as well, I invite you again to find ways of working with us. Hopefully this Punyache Paani doesn't end just with this week, but it will be something that we will use for courses and to teach a water elective later on this year, but also for the other colleges and academic spaces that have been involved with us to use the content. That would be wonderful, and to encourage more and more stories that come out of Pune and beyond Pune. We were very conscious. I know that we had wanted to do the peri-urban thing for this exhibition as well, but it didn't happen, and maybe a chapter 2 may look at some of those other basin level issues and all. But again, thank you everyone, and thank you to the team of volunteers that have helped us this whole week. Thank you to Chavi. I think Shalini, you already did a round of thanks. SNC, of course, you're hiding behind the screen there, Vivek, but thank you very much. And of course, my colleague, Vijaya, Shalini, and others who moderated this week as well. A warm thank you, and of course, to all the contributors that we've had. So again, Radhika, do you want to say the name of the hall tomorrow, please?
So tomorrow's cultural program will be at Jagannath Shetty Auditorium, which is also commonly known as KHS Auditorium in Kothurud. We plan to begin at 5, and we have a series of performances lined up. So hope to see you there. Thank you.
Music and theater and all sorts of interesting things happening. It's almost 2 hours, 5 to 7, everyone. So hope to see you there. I have something for you.